Welcome to the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One. My name is Mark Hamilton, joined as always by my friend, quote unquote, colleague, co-host, compatriot, Mark Daly. But we also have a very, very special guest this evening, and we teased at this a couple of days ago on our Twitter channel. Joining us tonight is our friend, Floridian Vincenzo Landino. My friend, how are you? Welcome to the show.
This is, I am genuinely excited to be back with you guys. It was Monza last year.
While.
Yeah.
In a while. Hey man, before we get into it, we've talked a lot, offline, the three of us, about the new F1 cars. So out of all the 2022 cars we've seen so far, which is the best looking Ferrari and why did you choose Ferrari? I just have to know, it's just one of those things that's been bugging me for a while. But
am I going to have to do this show with two Ferrari fans?
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, let's be real here. Go solo, Hamilton.
So since the last show, though, we have now seen the final car. The Alfa Romeo C42 dropped, and I gotta say, I don't know what you guys thought, but that is one incredibly sexy car as well. The red pops, the livery, the stylized font, that was a phenomenal looking car, and it's just one of many because so many cars look great this year.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're not kidding. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that out of all the cars out there, some of them I like more than others, but I think in general that at least from an aesthetics point of view, the new cars just they look awesome. And I'm hoping once we get to Bahrain, what is it like literally in a matter of hours, that they've had a week or so to sort out some of these issues that we saw in Barcelona last week, and they get them dialed in a little bit better, because I mean they look great, and I'm just hoping that by the time it gets serious, that they perform as good as they look.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean if it's got red in it, it looks good to me. So bonus points for having red.
Daly, that's the funny thing too. I think a lot of our listeners assume that you're a Red Bull fan, and I think deep down you're probably more partisan towards Ferrari than anything, which is a little bit ironic because you get so much heat for being a Red Bull fan. But Vincenzo Landino, obviously a huge Ferrari fan, and like you said, the last time you were on was, I think, almost immediately after you came back from Italy itself, where you of course enjoyed watching the final of the UEFA Championship.
I did. It was glorious. It was, yeah. I still just reminisce back to that last summer, so I just keep thinking about it. My heyday.
Well, it's funny because I was talking about it with some of the guys at work today. It's just like, where are these last 2 years gone? I mean, you think that, today's the 3rd, 4th of March? Kind of forgotten the last week's just been a blur.
But the 4th for me, the 3rd for you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's already past midnight on the East Coast. But I mean, if you think back, it's been almost 2 years to the day when the whole pandemic thing started and everything started shutting down. And it felt like the rest of 2020 just dragged. And I don't know what it is, but when we got into 2021, it's like the last year was just like a blur. And I mean, at least here where we live on the West Coast of Canada, it's been a little bit of stop and start from time to time. But it's basically for the first time in 2 years, I really feel like things are getting a little bit more normal again, and that's exciting. And I know that Formula One is still maybe a bit of a work in progress. I mean, it's been confirmed now that Russia is going to be canceled for obvious reasons. It sounded like the promoter was positive, or maybe not positive, but maybe a little optimistic that this was still going to happen at some point, that it was just suspended. But it sounds like they took the contract and tore it up into a little, million little pieces. And so it's then the Russian Grand Prix is not happening this year or next year. And I think they had a contract to like 2025 or something. Do either of you guys remember what it was? I think
remember too, it was supposed to move to St. Petersburg next year. This was actually going to be the last year of Sochi, so we won't see St. Petersburg, and deservedly so. But I was pretty impressed with the firm stance that Liberty took, right? Like you look at the FIA, and they've really come under fire for their decision to allow Russian licensed drivers to continue to compete in FIA sanctioned events, whereas Liberty was much more firm, and they said, nope, this event's done, and they tore up the contract and they walked away. So we may never return to Russia. And you know what, as a Formula One fan and a fan of general kind of human issues and humanitarian issues, I think that's probably the right move. And I applaud Liberty for taking such a firm stance on that one.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say that FIA statement in the beginning was a little interesting. When I saw it, it left a kind of a door open, for Russia to possibly happen this year. And the FIA being based in Europe, I felt like, okay, tracks and then kind of like allow Liberty, the American company, to be the bad guys, which again, like Mark said, deservedly so. But it was interesting just to watch that kind of, dynamic there. Let the American company turn, like let them deal with making that decision.
And you make such a great point, because the FIA, in a sense, has kind of taken a copped out position here, in the sense that, hey, you know what, we're going to ban flags, we're going to ban all of those kind of symbols of national identity, but Russian drivers can continue to race in FIA sanctioned events. But they've kind of left it on the national racing associations to prohibit a driver. So one of the things that we learned in the last couple of days is, even if Mazepin retains his seat this year, which hour by hour appears to become less and less likely, he won't be racing at Silverstone, because the British Racing Association has banned Russian licensed drivers.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it's really sad, just the situation in general. And I mean, there's plenty of, stories developing around this one. I mean, the Ukrainian Federation has called for the FIA to ban, all Russian license holders. And, for me, it's a touchy subject, because, I totally understand it. But when you start kind of like dividing like normal people to us versus them, I don't really like that. I mean, everybody knows on the show that we're not big fans of Nikita Mazepin, but that's not to do with his nationality or anything like that. It's just that, he's a guy that's made some incredibly poor life choices, both on and off the track. And that's where we've had issue with him. And I mean, we've seen so many different things Russian get canceled over the last week or so. And I mean, I completely understand it, but when I just don't know when it stops, but certainly, I mean, you can understand why, the Ukrainian, authorities would want to see that happen. And I mean, we've seen just, was it today that the Russian and Belarusians were going to be excluded from the Paralympic Games that are going to start in a week or two, whenever it is. And, the IOC's taken it a step further, saying that the Russians, the Belarusian athletes, should also be banned from all international competitions. We've seen guys like Alex Ovechkin get dumped, lose his endorsements from the hockey equipment company CCM today. I mean, just there's so many different things. And I mean, I think Danny Kvyat, former Formula One driver, was even just talking about it a couple of days ago, and or maybe it was even as recent as yesterday, just the fact that he didn't want to see that extended to Russian drivers and things like that. And again, with Kvyat, I mean, I don't have anything against him. I mean, for him, I mean, he was a bit of an inconsistent and somewhat unpredictable Formula One driver. And I mean, although he's a guy in an incredibly privileged position in his life, it's just like, where do you, how far do these things go? But I mean, I think I guess basically what it comes down to, I mean, most people are going to have issues with the Russian leadership rather than individual Russian people themselves on, most levels and areas of society, right?
I think you make some really great points, my friend. And I think all three of us collectively agree that what's happening in Ukraine is a modern travesty. It's an absolute horror. And I'm happy that in so many ways the international community is rallying together to find possibly, and I don't know how to say this in a politically appropriate way, but I think the international community is finding ways to put pressure on Russia to end this military onslaught as quickly as possible. And, I think this is one of the places where you and I diverge, which absolutely, the Russian Grand Prix has to be canceled right away. It's done. Kudos to Liberty for making that happen so quickly and making clear that we're not going to race there anytime soon. I think where the debate continues to extend is, should Russian citizens be prohibited from competing in professional sporting leagues outside of Russia? Should they be banned from competing in FIA sanctioned events? We've seen FIFA stance. We've seen the IOC stance. FIA said, hey, you know what? They're good to do it. They just can't race under a Russian flag. But I think the broader Formula One community is rallying more that no, more pressure should be put on Russia and more pressure should be put on the Russian population, because if you see things like this taken away from them, it could create an upswell of support within Russia for the international cause, which is obviously to end this war. But Vincenzo, I look to you and I ask, because you and I haven't had a chance to talk about this. Obviously, what's happening in Ukraine global travesty and it trumps anything that's happening in the world of motorsport. But you made a great point when we were talking the other day that it's hard to disentangle the two because Formula One and Russia intersect in so many ways. But what is your perspective? Should a Russian driver continue to be sanctioned to race in FIA events this year, or is it a sensitive issue and there's maybe there's no right or wrong answer?
I think it gets to the point where and you start mentioning other athletes too, because you can't just do it to you can't do it to one set of athletes and not do it to all of them. It makes zero sense, right? So Ovechkin losing sponsorship kind of feels wrong, whether you like Ovechkin or not as a player. It feels wrong, but at the same time, that's CCM saying, well, we are not going to participate in any way, shape, or form, putting money into that economy, right? Whatever it means.
Right.
So you have to think, Apple shut down, they shut down all, I think, operations in Russia, Oracle, which is now relevant, right? Oracle, massive Red Bull sponsor, they shut down or suspended, I say, operations in Russia. So things like that are going to happen, and I think tying that back to athletes, when you look at athletes, they have sponsorships. They have, in Mazepin's case, maybe a little bit different, but let's just pretend Uralkali was not his father and it was just some other oligarch that was paying him to drive there. You just can't separate the two. And so I think that in order to put pressure, this is what I was going to say before, because Mark had mentioned, Daly had mentioned the IOC and whatnot. To see your flag in a major international competition is a source of pride.
Right.
It's that's something that you, as a citizen of that country, you feel like something. You're a part of that. So to strip them of that is huge. But then to completely remove them from competition, regardless of flag, is even a step further. And I think it's the right call because of the situation that's happening and how, as we're talking, there's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe being bombed by the Russians, right? This is huge. This is big. So how do you stop that without inciting World War III? I think that's basically what everyone that's involved and has any ties to either a Russian athlete, a Russian team, or anything in Russia, that's the way they're going to handle it. And I don't disagree with how they are handling that. I think it does suck for someone who is a completely innocent Russian citizen, right? If they are, of course, because I don't know all their situations.
Supporting the war, yeah.
Correct. I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
So if they're innocent, I feel terrible for them. But at the same time, we all suffer consequences of somebody else's wrongdoing at some point, right? It happens. And so that's what's happening now. It's terrible. It's terrible all around. And if this, let's just put it this way. If not allowing Nikita Mazepin to drive a race car helps keep us out of World War III, I think everyone's going to be okay with that. You know what I mean?
100%.
So that's kind of that's where I stand with it.
On that note, Daly, I'm curious. I think based on everything we've heard today, he may not have a seat come Friday afternoon. Do you guys think he races this year, or do you think he's done? And you make that point that, hey, the money that was putting him in that seat's gone, or at least it's frozen. Do you think he races this year?
Nope.
I don't think so. And moreover, I think that the question becomes, if he's done for this year, does he find a way back into Formula One at some point when this thing cools down and things, quote unquote, goes back to normal? I mean, the most overused phrase from the last 2 years, right? Used in now many different circumstances. But I don't know. Once that opportunity is gone, he didn't really do anything to distinguish himself. Okay, he wasn't driving the greatest car on the grid to begin with, but I just think that it's going to be too difficult. I don't see a way back for him after it happens. I just think that opportunity.
And I think that's nothing to do with him being a Russian citizen. I think that has everything to do with the fact that off the track, he's a PR nightmare. And there's probably 10 other drivers somewhere on the globe right now that could outcompete him in a Formula One car. So I feel like, and it's probably going to be old news by the time people start downloading this podcast, but I don't think he'll be racing. I don't think he'll be in that car come up.
We always seem to be out of sync with the news cycle. So there you go. But
maybe we just need to record a couple of hours later.
That's the thing, like we could get Vincenzo up at like 6 a.m. We could get up at 3 a.m. here, and then maybe with that time shift, we might coincide a little bit better with morning on the East Coast. And I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe sacrifices need to be made with our own personal sleep habits. But hey, guys, let's just take a quick break. When we come back, on the flip side, there's still plenty of things to talk about, and we'll do so in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll just get a quick message from our sponsors. Okay, well, welcome back. And well, I mean, there's still plenty of things here regarding, the Russian Grand Prix and Mazepin and things like that. I feel that, we've devoted enough time to this subject already. I think we should move on to, which is probably one of the biggest stories of obviously of this week, I think of the season so far. And that is, reportedly that Max Verstappen is on the verge of signing a £40 million or $55 million per year contract with Red Bull. That's going to keep him together with Red Bull reportedly until 2028. I mean, that's just massive. I mean, Vincenzo, from like a business point of view, if Max and Red Bull can make this thing work, that this isn't just rumor, how massive is that deal?
I mean, it's huge, right? It's one of the largest deals, and I don't have a notes on it right now of all the athletes, but if I think about the athletes that are the highest paid, I mean, that puts him right up there with the top. We know Hamilton is reportedly around 55 million as well, so that puts him right on par with Hamilton. Completely on track, off the track, Hamilton probably blows him away in endorsement deals, but I mean, on track money that's the highest, and athlete deals in general, that puts them right up there. So huge for Red Bull. They're putting that money that they just got from Oracle to good use. That you figure it kind of coincides with the Oracle deal too, because the Oracle deal is a 5-year thing, and so they're guaranteed to have $100 million a year coming in from Oracle. They're paying 50 of that out to Max. They probably can't use all of it anyway because the cost caps. So that's one way to do it. I think, listen, they've, like it or not, whether you're a Red Bull fan or not, you have to realize that their strategy has been Max since he started, right? Mm-hmm. And so what do you do? What does any team do when the star quarterback wins a Super Bowl, or, the star player on the pitch wins some sort of championship?
He gets paid, right?
Gets paid. And so that's what's happening here. I think it's interesting because, you'll hear a lot of fodder, especially on Twitter. It's only one championship. So when you compare him to someone like a Hamilton who's won 7 and is making the same amount of money, it is kind of ridiculous. But if you look at deals in other sports, each and every year, the higher deals get higher, or the high deals get more and more costly for teams and whatnot. So I think this is just a matter of where we are in time, and he just happens to have gotten that to a level where they want to pay him that. I think it's going to be very difficult, though, for them to ever pair him with anyone. I think Perez is a great pairing for him because he fits very well. But it'll be interesting because if they're looking to
who comes after,
do more, like
right?
How do you? Well, and then how do you? I can't say. I'm not going to say they can't afford it because clearly there's money there. But do you ever pair him with somebody that that's if you're a driver coming into that second seat and the other guy's getting paid $55 million to be there, you're second fiddle. You're less than second fiddle. You are just there to make that person win the championship. Yeah, so Mark,
I'm going to throw this. So sorry to cut you off there, Vincenzo, but I just can't help but thinking when you're talking there, so these teams, they have so much money now, and we're into this cost cap era with this declining ceiling that they have. clearly these teams have money. If they can't throw it into the cars now, maybe we're going to see the driver's salaries start going up. Maybe that's the way that they start spending the sponsorship money. Like you say, I mean, they're getting 100 million per year from Oracle, and 55 of that is going to Max. It's almost like I wouldn't say a free ride for them in that regard, but I mean, certainly it helps. But Mark, when you heard the news from that, I think Vincenzo will probably want to jump back into that. I mean, either you can take this one, but them reportedly signing him on a long-term deal to 2028. My first reaction was they want to do with Max, Red Bull, that is, what Mercedes has done with Lewis for almost like the last 7-8 years since 2014. I think they want to start building a dynasty around him. Whether or not they can pull that off is a completely different question. But that, I mean, it's obvious that he's their guy for the long term. I mean, that's obvious.
Yeah, so put this into context as well. When this deal is over, he's still only going to be 30 years old. He's only going to be 30 years old, and he'll have driven 300 Formula One Grand Prix, assuming everything goes to plan. But a couple of things, like I think our listeners will probably appreciate this, but I went and quickly Googled some stats because I wanted to get a sense of where this $55 million a year salary stacked up. You look at the NBA, Steph Curry's making $46 million. He's leading all of the players in the NBA. James Harden, John Wall, Russell Westbrook, a couple of really bad deals there at $44 million a piece. Jump over to Major League Baseball. Max Scherzer's making $43 million. Mike Trout's making $37. And then in the NFL, obviously it's super top heavy because they have the worst players union and the worst collective bargaining agreement in all of global sports. But Patrick Mahomes makes $45 million. Josh Allen's 43. Dak Prescott with the Cowboys at 40. And Deshaun Watson makes 39. So he eclipses what any individual, any team athlete would make in the United States. And of course, when you start factoring in endorsements and things, but when you look at strictly their salary, he's out earning anyone playing for a major professional sports team in America. And of course, I didn't look at the NHL because their cost cap's pretty prohibitive. But, Vincenzo makes a really great point, which is, you flash back 5 years, you're pumping in $100 million from Oracle. All of that money is going into your car. It's all going to your team. But if your cost cap's $140 million now, and obviously drivers are excluded for now, and your top 3 executives are excluded for now, where else do you put that money? Like, you put it to the bottom line, which I'm sure some teams would be happy to do. But it also opens up the question of a driver salary cap, which is something that's been bandied about. But I'll be very honest, if anyone is getting the money in the sport, I'm very happy, unlike Romain Grosjean, who made some comments today suggesting that nobody deserves $40 million, no driver deserves $40 million. I would be very happy to see the drivers earn this money because they're the ones going out on track every single weekend and risking everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Vincenzo.
No, I was going to add that I think you also have, if to your point, Daly, if there's more money now in the sport from sponsors and it can be spent on drivers, do teams get a little more discerning with who's in their seats? Like, does it get, are you going to throw a lot of money at a driver? Like, I'm just going to use, a Mazepin or a Sonoda or are you going to throw money at someone like that versus maybe waiting or like getting top tier guys that have actually won at lower levels, maybe won consistently. Like, are pay drivers necessarily needed, right? Like, if a team like Haas had money coming in, do they need a sponsor like Earl Colley to say, we want this driver? I mean, we heard a bunch of stories there about that. So like, do they need to? I don't know. Maybe not.
That's a great point because nowadays with all this money like flowing in that we saw with Oracle a couple of weeks ago, and then Bybit throwing in what was like another 100 million, right? So I mean, you got almost $500 million in sponsorship coming in just from these two companies alone over the next couple of years. And you've got like a finite amount that you can put into the car. All of a sudden, the guy that comes with like a massive sponsorship deal, or the one sponsor that says, "Yeah, I'm willing to give you X number of dollars for the next couple of years or whatever." Now maybe you can be a little bit more choosy with it. It's like, yeah, well, you know what? We don't actually think we need to. We've gotten all this money.
Awesome point.
We can maybe put the guy that we really want in that second car. and that's kind of maybe that was part of the reason for the whole cost cap, just from preventing it like getting ridiculously more out of hand. But this could be an interesting byproduct of that.
For sure.
I can't, man, I'm a loss for words here because I agree with this point so much, right? Like if the teams can only drive $140 million into the development of the car and they're all earning more than that in sponsorship and in prize money, you know what? What's the relevance now of a paid driver as well? To your point, like they can be more discerning, like, hey, you're bringing $30 million as a paid driver. We don't really need that money because we've already covered the cost of car development. We'd rather just have a better driver. And maybe in the future, we don't see any Nikita Mazepin, because that's such a great point. The teams can be more discerning because, hey, we've covered the cost of construction and development. We just want to put the best possible driver in this car so we have a chance to compete for a Constructors' Championship. But yeah, wicked point, man.
You know, I love all these different articles that popped up on different news sites like autosport.com and stuff like that over the last day or so. Like, I know that this is still reported and it's yet to be confirmed until this podcast gets published, of course, then it'll be a done deal. But I love all these pictures that they have. It's like they picked all the pictures of Max Verstappen looking his grumpiest. I mean, I know he doesn't smile a lot, but you would have thought that somewhere in that stock imagery, they would have at least been able to find a picture that would be somewhat fitting of a guy that is just literally signed a contract worth of a fortune, right? But it's kind of interesting. Hey guys, let's talk now about the cars themselves. I mean, we saw a lot of interesting things in Barcelona last week, including the creation of a brand new term when it comes to Formula One cars, porpoising. I mean, that was kind of interesting. But I mean, obviously there were some unexpected things happening when they took the cars out and got them on the track for the first time. So that's going to have to be resolved, and we'll see that how that goes in Bahrain here pretty quick. But Max Verstappen it says he's pretty happy with the new RB18, and he says it won't be the same car that he's going to be driving in Bahrain next week, and he expects it to be completely different. So I don't know what obviously he knows something that we don't, but I mean, based on what we saw last week, a lot of teams have a lot of work to do because a lot of them didn't really get to wind it up and really hit that top end, like that upper limit that we were really hoping to see.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see when we get to Bahrain is fundamentally different cars, right? Like we, and I especially, was notoriously loud and angry about the fact that Barcelona became a shakedown when we were all expecting a traditional kind of preseason winter testing session where the cars were really putting the cars through their paces. But I think what we're going to see are fundamentally different cars. And I think some of these teams, not so much Haas necessarily, but some of these teams like Red Bull and Mercedes and Aston Martin managed to put in a really significant number of laps. And the reason that's important is because they can accumulate data and try to understand whether their design decisions and the conclusions that they came to when it came to engineering these new cars based on the current set of technical regulations, whether it worked, whether they got the outcome they expected. So I think some of the teams probably already had some suspicions about what the outcome was going to be, and they probably had new parts and aero designs in the shop. And I think other teams probably came and discovered that there were some really unfortunate outcomes based on the design language and some of the decisions that they made when they were designing these cars. So I think when we get to Bahrain, we're going to see very, very different cars. And to be fair, even during the 3 days that we were in Barcelona, the cars were rapidly transforming in front of our eyes. You'd see the Merc would go out and it would have no vents. And then the Merc would go out again and it's got vents. And then the Merc would go out again and now it has even more vents. Like the cars were transforming before our eyes. And I think if we learned anything from that shakedown, it was really just that they needed 3 days of shakedown. Like these cars are so raw and it's such an unknown dimension and element to these teams that if they were to have just shown up at a preseason winter testing session, they would have been in quite a state and the times would have looked terrible and there would have been a lot of red flags and there would have been a lot of delays. So they deserve those 3 days, but I'll be very curious as to what we're going to see in Bahrain next week.
Well, as Max said, it was an early iteration, which seems kind of a funny way to put it, considering these cars have been in development basically for over 2 years now. I mean, they got pushed back a year, and it seems kind of funny considering they I wouldn't say a bonus year, but they had an extra year to get these cars designed and built and everything, and we get to the track and they behave so different than they did in the wind tunnel and the sim and everything like that. But he did say he was really happy with the balance of the car, and despite he was over half a second off of Lewis's fastest time at Barcelona there. But this next story I thought was kind of interesting, that some of the updates that we're going to see are not in the spirit of the rules, which I think is kind of interesting. And I just got to pull it up in my notes here exactly where it was. But it was okay. So it was. Oh, it was from Ted Kravitz from Sky Sports, saying that there was going to be some controversies with who had interpreted the rules in a way that wasn't intended by the FAA. So there might be some controversies over flexi floors and different ideas and things like that. So, that I do find a little bit interesting, because I thought that there was going to be less latitude this year, and the way that the regs were going, that they were going to try and tighten up any of these loopholes. But I don't know. Does that mean that perhaps the way that the new regs are maybe aren't quite as airtight as they thought they were? I mean, except maybe with things like flexi wings and some of the more controversial things that we've seen over the last, say, season and a half or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, reading Adrian Newey's book somewhat recently, How to Build a Car, it's interesting because not interesting, it is interesting, I guess, but he makes it very clear that his one job is to do everything that he can that the rules don't say you can't do, basically. So it's like... And I'm sure he's not the only designer doing this, right? So when you're looking at building a car, when you're looking at any iterations, it's the rules don't say we can't do it, so we're going to do that. And it's kind of crazy how different the interpretations are based on the teams, and who went with wide-bodied cars, who went with a narrower car, who went with vents, who's going with no vents. The side pods were all different. I mean, there's like so many different things, and we were talking a little bit about Max. It's like these guys haven't been able to drive the car. That was the first time they sat in the car and took it out on the track.
Yep.
So it is really fascinating that the teams design and they figure things out, and they put it in a wind tunnel, and they put it on every testing piece of equipment they can, and they design a car that they think is going to be fast, right? Then you get to the track, and the track gives you different feedback than the wind tunnel ever could, hence the porpoising issue.
Yep.
And drivers are out there for the first time. You're simulating wet conditions. You're just trying to, like, is the car even reliable? I think that's what we learned more than anything, was how reliable these vehicles were. But the next month is going to be all about how can we get the most power out of it? How can we get the best air? What's the best aero setup for different conditions? And so it's pretty crazy to think of what these teams are doing in just 4 weeks, from the time they did the shakedown to the time we're going to see the cars again in Bahrain. Yeah, it's like, to me, I'm always in awe of that, because it's like there's no time to dilly dally. It's like we got to get right to it. We've only got 4 weeks to get this car in as fast as we can, and so that to me was really the most fun to watch with this whole shakedown thing. Like, all the content we were getting was just like, and like you said, they're making changes every time the car goes out. There's something different happening. To that extent, like, I think that it is pretty cool to have the shakedown. I wish they just let us. I wish they broadcasted it, but yeah. Go ahead.
For me, it's going to be interesting too, where that equilibrium sets in. It's just like for everybody that kind of was working through a deficit or some sort of issue that was unexpected, when we get to the proper test and then to the first Grand Prix, like where is the equilibrium? Is Mercedes going to be on the same level as Red Bull and vice versa? Are they further behind somebody else? And because we all know over the course of the season that the same car that gets to the start line of the very first race is going to be incrementally getting quicker over the course of the season as that same car when it crosses the finish line in Abu Dhabi in December. It's just like, how do they improve versus everybody else? And, it kind of goes up and down and back and forth throughout the season. But that's going to be, I think all the eyes are going to be looking at the track there in Bahrain, especially when we get to, obviously testing is going to be interesting, but it's just going to be I wouldn't say more of the same of what we saw last week in Barcelona, but it'll really be, the first obvious true test is when we get to qualifying for the first race of the year. And then we'll know, okay, well, at least in that, in the qualifying race, of course, full race distance is a different question. But there's just too many ifs and whys and hows and what ifs at the moment. And like you, Vincenzo, I'm just in awe that you can take a car to the track and they can discover this issue that nobody had foreseen or expected. They can go away for a couple of weeks and, these really brilliant people can come up with solutions and fixes for them. And then these equally brilliant and very technical people can manufacture these parts and put them onto the cars, and the drivers can get back in. And then, well, obviously they hope that they'll figure that problem and solve it. But
I know I'm jumping ahead a couple of stories here, and I definitely don't want to skip the next one because it's super juicy. But just while we're on the topic of the 2022 cars and we're kind of reflecting back on Barcelona, what were a couple of the things that surprised you or really intrigued you or were maybe a little bit unexpected? I think for me, just a couple of thoughts just while we're on the kind of the conversation topic of the 2022 cars. One, the cars looked immensely better than I ever expected. Yeah. And I know we've been talking about this. I think another thing that surprised me is I was so paranoid that we were going to enter into this era of spec cars and all the cars were going to look absolutely the same. And the variation in design was dramatically different than I expected, which I thought was really, really, really exciting, whether it was the side pods or the height of the front wing or the way the elements on the front wing were attached to the car. It was incredibly, incredibly different. And then also the cars are just significantly faster than I ever expected them to be at a shakedown. They had no business being this fast based on everything that we've been told and led to believe over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. But for the two of you, having we got 3 days at Barcelona. We saw a ton of laps. We saw these cars pounding around that track. What were your takeaways, your thoughts, the surprises that maybe you had?
Vincenzo, why don't you take this one first?
Sure. Ferrari was super reliable. Loved how many laps they got in. Both drivers. I think what really was like, I don't know if it was eye-opening, but both Sainz and Leclerc ran very similar amount of laps as opposed to a lot of the other drivers. Now, I actually don't quote me on that. Maybe Hamilton or someone else can pull that up and correct me if I'm wrong. But they ran very similar amount of laps, which I think is good, and especially with how close they were last year, I think it's nice to see that they're pretty level with who the team is focusing on. You saw with some of the other teams where it's like one of the driver ran maybe 7 or 8 times the amount of laps as the other one. So it was interesting just to see that. Some of the teams I felt like had such issues. Alpine was one. Haas wasn't surprising, but I mean they had all sorts of reliability. They couldn't even it was like they couldn't even get going. I think McLaren showed really, really good reliability and pace. Not shocked, but I think as a Ferrari fan, I kind of thought, okay, McLaren probably lost it at the end of last year, and they're probably going to carry that into this year. They're looking pretty solid, and both Danny Rick and Lando were both running really well. So that's that's a positive for that team. Yeah, I'm still curious to see how guy like a driver like Bottas does. In Alfa Romeo, are him and Zhu. Is it Zhu?
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 Yeah.
Guan Yu Zhu? I don't know how to say it. It'll be curious to see how they can kind of like pair together, and like, does Bottas, is he gonna take it, step it up, or was he always just a second driver? Like, that'll be interesting. But yeah, the cars themselves, I think were all pretty, from my perspective, I thought was all chalk. What is it like? When March Madness, it's chalk. Like, the favorites were the favorites, the way I looked at it, and the teams kind of towards the bottom. So I'd say the more surprising things were like the Alpine. That was probably Alpine. Aston Martin, it wasn't as good as I thought they would be, but that's what surprised me.
Yeah, well, I think for me, let's say that Ferrari made headlines for the right reasons. I mean, over the last couple of years, I mean, they've made headlines for not the right reasons. And I mean, they've been pretty upfront about it too, saying, you know what, we're not targeting championships or wins this season. We're looking down the road a year or two. So I think that, what we saw at Barcelona, although obviously it's very early days, I think for the Tifosi, it was, a glimmer of hope. That they had good pace, they had good reliability, they weren't miles off, the big dogs, right? But your point about Alpine is very well taken as well, and I think that, if you're Otmar Sapnauer, you're probably standing there, oh my gosh, what did I get into? Because I could just see him walking into that garage, and there's a lot of people standing there with big nervous smiles on their faces, and after we saw that, there was probably a lot more nervous looking smiles and laughter, and they obviously have a lot of work cut out for them. McLaren, like you say, very strong showing, and I'm still impressed with the job that they've done over the last couple of years. I mean, this was a team I seriously thought was on life support like 4 or 5 years ago, that if they didn't get it turned around, that I really thought that it was going to end really, really badly for them. And I don't know what to make of Williams just yet. Mark and I have talked about in the last couple of weeks under the new ownership, and the language and just the culture that seems to be growing in that team is that, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with what the Williams family was doing and what they did. I mean, obviously they won races, they won championships, and they did it for like 40 something years, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that's, Formula One kind of outgrew them a little bit, I think. And then when you hear like some of the the comments coming out of the team that we're no longer a family run team, it's like the new owners, I think, are pretty aware of the fact that we're in the big leagues, and we got to we got to step our game up. Whether or not that translates to better performance on the track, who knows, right?
I was gonna, if I could just jump in real quick. Yeah, I think that. So there's been a lot of conversation I've had with folks in, what company or what entity could come into the sport and pick up, like, be it an 11th team or a 12th team, who can actually be a start a team. And the biggest thing is, okay, there's a lot of companies that have money. There's a lot of companies that could throw money at this and maybe do well. But we kind of collectively came to the agreement that you need leadership that's passionate about it.
Sure.
Or you need somebody that's, and so whether the Williams family lost the passion or whatever it was, I mean, obviously, they got older, things like that. Frank passed away, rest in peace, that too. But I think like you have to, like, there has to be that level of passion that, like, you don't do this because you're trying to get rich. I mean, although that's probably a great something that happens from it, a byproduct, right? But I don't think that's what you do it for. And so it'll be interesting to see what that team does. Like, there's another team that, F1 has to always like protect at all costs from here on out. Just like McLaren, there's those teams where you never want to lose them from the sport. And Williams will be interesting to watch, but Dorilton, I don't know. I don't know enough about them to like comment on it, but I think coming into a sport like Formula One and trying to run it like a business is, this isn't Moneyball here, right? This isn't like the Oakland Athletics or anything. It's it's a sport that needs that passion.
Yeah, well, Mark, we've talked about it too, like just the fact that when we heard that Williams was being taken over by a bunch of venture capitalists, we didn't really think that like that story was going to end well. But now we're kind of wondering, well, we can see one of two scenarios that they've figured that they've hit on something that they can build up themselves, or they're building up and making it attractive to, say the VW group or somebody else to come in and take it over and then rebrand it as Audi or Porsche or whatever, right? Or perhaps something else. But I mean, excuse me, I was just going to say that I always found it astounding, especially I think it was in the very first season of Drive to Survive. They had one episode with Williams, and they had like they showed I think it was like one that's sort of like a big sort of team meeting, and there was like this auditorium filled with like hundreds of people in there, and Claire Williams is up there on the podium talking about like whatever, and I'm like literally looking at this auditorium filled with obviously very qualified and smart people, and I'm just like, looking at all that talent there, I'm just like, why the hell are you guys like at the back of the grid several seconds off the pace? I mean, it seems almost inconceivable to me that with that amount of brain power in house that they would be struggling so much. But
humble flex on that note, by the way, I've been in that auditorium, so I know exactly the one you're speaking of. But I think you summed it up perfectly just on the topic of Williams, that Formula One outgrew Williams, right? Like Williams was a family-run small business, and it adapted and it grew and it experienced some periods of tremendous success, but it simply couldn't keep up financially with the rest of the sport. And I feared when Dorilton came in that they were going to strip it down. They were going to strip it down, sell off the assets and move on. And rather, they've invested in it. Now, I've had it on pretty good authority from a couple of people now that, I shouldn't say a couple of people, one very specific source, that Dorilton is a front. And Dorilton is a financial front for another buyer. And that other buyer doesn't want to reveal themselves at this time. And for the longest time, I assumed that was a person until somebody had made the assumption or the guess that, hey, maybe that person, that group is the Volkswagen group, right? That, hey, Dorilton, we're going to fund this. You're going to be our front, buy the team, clean it up, start investing in the infrastructure. And if we choose to enter the sport, we've got a team ready to go, either by a complete buyout or by injecting our power units into that team. And it's interesting because we've seen Williams now, they've invested in the factory. They've invested in their people. They've been going on a hiring spree. They bought in top quality people. Jos Capito came over from the Volkswagen group. He ran their motorsport division very successfully for many, many years. That ultimately, this is a team as well that is now starting to show a lot of independence from Mercedes, right? That as a satellite team of Mercedes, in a sense, a customer team of their power unit, there was this expectation last year that Nick de Vries was going to be driving a Williams this year. That didn't happen. As much as that upset and frustrated Toto, Alex Albon from that evil empire from Red Bull is driving that car. So maybe this team is starting to flex a little bit of their own independence because they anticipate that either, hey, there's a future buyer coming in, or we're going to partner with the Volkswagen group in the future. But I think they're in a much better place than they were. Absolutely love the Williams family. I just think, to your point, Mark, F1 had outgrown the Williams family and their financial means.
Yeah, totally. And I love the move that they made to do the unexpected thing and bring Alex Albon in from Red Bull.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I don't think that anybody really saw that. I mean, we got a question about that. Maybe, well, why don't we just answer it right now since we're on the topic? And this is from Ray and SD. And his question is, where do we see the duo of Albon and Latifi finishing the season? Can they challenge the AlphaTauri boys? That's a great question, right? And I think that both of these guys have something to prove. I mean, we love Nicky because Nicky's a Canadian and, for, a couple of reasons. But I mean, he's been in Formula One for a couple of years, albeit in a car that hasn't been the greatest. But, I don't see too many more trips around the block before for Nicky before I kind of see maybe his time in Formula One, maybe coming to an end. And Albon, I mean, sort of kind of maybe not that dramatic, but I mean, he's had a couple of kicks at the can here as well and hasn't really been able to make it work just yet. So I think these are two guys that really have something to prove, but I guess the big question is, are they going to have the car underneath them to get it done? And if so, do they have what it takes between their ears, that mental fortitude to get it done themselves? So I mean, there's certainly a team to watch this year, both of those guys, and just the whole situation. I don't know what you think,
Vincenzo.
Mark?
I don't know if you agree with my take, but I think if we look at everything equally, Nicholas Latifi has to be a favorite to win the driver's title in 2022. I think that's just a logical outcome based on all the data that's available to us. So for me, I think Nicholas will be competing for a World Drivers
minimal
Championship.
Data at the moment, right?
And, and Alexander Albon will probably be a really good wingman. Vincenzo, what are your thoughts? You're a little less biased because you live in the United States, but your take on how they'll compete this year?
I think Albon's a good driver. I like Alex Albon. I think, just the way he reacted to Max winning that championship, jumping on the radio at the end of that lap, and the excitement. I mean, I think the kid he's gone through his ups and downs, right? He was submitted to Red Bull, which I think that takes a lot out of anybody, is going to take a lot out of anyone. That it could actually, kill your desire for the sport, like I think potentially happened with Daniel Ricciardo. I think this might reinvigorate him. I just don't think they're going to have the car. Latifi, I'd love to see how he
right now. Watch what you say.
I think Latifi, to Daly's point, he doesn't have that many more opportunities to prove that he, deserves a spot in F1. I would like to see how he responds to all the criticism he got, which he said time and time again in the offseason, how it affected him. I mean, rightfully so. He was getting death threats, for Christ's sakes. Like, terrible, awful. People are just garbage sometimes.
Yeah.
He didn't deserve that, but I want to see, like, how does he bounce back from it? If he bounces back and he is driving with a vengeance and he can, put that to good use, that energy then I think he's going to have a good season, and they, both drivers will. But if something like that affects you, and again, I don't know the mental state of him personally. I don't know the man. So if that affects him, I think that could kind of throw things off. But I don't know. Finish ahead of AlphaTauri, huh? That was the original thought.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I don't know how that car is going to be this year either. So that'll be an interesting battle to watch.
Because they've become a pretty solid middle of the pack team last couple of years.
Gasly, another Red Bull, cast off Max. I want to say Max Verstappen, number 2 casualty over there. I mean, he's been driving really, really well. So he's got a lot to prove, because he's likely gunning for a top spot somewhere else as well. But I mean, I don't know. AlphaTauri to me seems like the stronger duo right now. Tsunoda had a pretty decent season. I mean, he had his ups and downs. He's a rookie. There were times where he showed some pretty good pace, and there were times where he was kind of like knuckleheaded driving, but who doesn't? And I'm going to say I still think AlphaTauri comes out ahead between those two. But I think Williams has a really good shot at getting out of the bottom 3. Let's put it that way.
AlphaTauri's fate is, and I'll make this quick, Daily. AlphaTauri's fate is going to be very closely linked to Red Bull, and bear with me on this thought. One, every transferable part they can buy from Red Bull, they do. They share the same spectacular Honda power unit as the Red Bull team. And you have to assume, either because of backroom dealings or just subtle communications, that there's a lot of knowledge transfer going back and forth. And the teams don't have as much creative license when it comes to designing this car. So I would assume that the delta between these two teams would be tighter than last year. So for that reason, I got to give, especially if Yuki can show some strides this year, and he he demonstrated last year he can be fast. I think I would give I would absolutely give the edge to AlphaTauri in the Constructors' Championship by the end of the year.
Yeah, I got one more question for you, but I'm going to throw it to a break here, and then I'll ask you as soon as we come back. Just going back to Pierre Gasly, and I'll just leave it at that. So, anyways, we'll take a quick break for a quick message from our sponsor. So don't go away. Okay, welcome back to the show, everybody. And just a quick question. Either of you guys can answer this one. I can't remember now if Gasly is one of the guys that is out of contract or his contract expires at the end of this year. I think he is. And I'm just curious to get to either of you, one or both of your takes on this one. Gasly, I think if he has a good season, and I think he's had obviously a pretty good last 12 to 18, 24 months. I think he's been pretty good, pretty solid on his return to AlphaTauri, or Toro Rosso maybe even was before, when with all the revolving doors within Red Bull there. I think he's going to be trying to shop himself this year. Well, with all the opportunities that are going to come up within the paddock this year, I think that he would do well if he was able to move on to another team. I think he would see more success if he gets out of that Red Bull system. What do you guys think?
100%. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that getting out of that system, which is clearly a one driver of four, they prioritize one driver of the four. That definitely screws with you. When I don't know what the average life career of a F1 driver is, but it's not very long, right? So you've got to maximize the fact that he's got enough talent to continue getting opportunities. It's only going to last so long, right? He does. I don't know what team that is, though, because if we sit back and look at that, the only real opportunity you would think would be Mercedes if Lewis retires. Maybe McLaren if Ricardo does the same. I don't know where, it doesn't look like Ferrari's. It looks like they've got two drivers that they could really lock in for a while. I don't know. That's a really good question. The answer to the question is yes, he does. He should get out from the Red Bull system. I think he'll shine because he's driving like he doesn't care right now. He's like, he seems so relaxed and loose. Yep. He's just like, I'm going to drive. I just don't know where he goes. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about where he ends up if he were to move, and who would be a good fit for his driving.
I'll twist it a little bit here on you, Vincenzo and Mark, because I think that I guess part of the problem with this is if we start talking about the NFL, we know that Patrick Mahomes is going to be playing in Kansas City until a certain date, like his contract, and then there's options or whatever, right? In Formula One, these guys sign a contract, it goes into a secret underground vault guarded by a bunch of Bond villains, and nobody knows the terms or the length. I mean, we have ideas and we can speculate about it, and that's the thing. But then on the flip side, these contracts apparently don't really hold any weight, and they're almost torn up and thrown away and reworked at the drop of a hat. I mean, you made a really good point about Ferrari. I mean, Charles Leclerc is not going anywhere. I kind of had some question marks about Carlos Sainz when he signed there, but I mean, they were pretty quickly dispelled, and I think that they got a really solid, really, really good driver lineup there. I mean, one question mark, I mean, I think Lando is obviously a lock at McLaren. I think he stays there as long as he wants to. Obviously, they're going to want to keep him there as long as he wants to stay there. Let's put it that way. And as long as that team is competitive and hopefully getting better, I mean, potentially I could see an opening there with Ricardo. I mean, I wouldn't say Danny Rick's getting long in the tooth, but I mean, he's advanced in age in his career to a certain extent, and he hasn't really been able to nail it with a team since he left Red Bull, right? And you kind of look around Red Bull. Yeah, that's not really going to be an option. Max is going to be their guy forever. And Mercedes, like you say, it depends what happens with Lewis. I mean, they seem to have given George the unofficial nod to be Lewis's heir apparent, if you want to call him that. I mean, the young, hot prospect that really hasn't a chance to really shine just yet compared to like a lot of the other class of drivers that he came into Formula One with. I mean, he had that amazing weekend in Bahrain at the end of 2020 when Lewis had to miss those couple of races with when he had COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like this circular discussion. I think about it, and I'm just like 100% he would shine somewhere else, to steal your words, Vincenzo. But then it's just like the whole thing is just like where, and I just don't see anything for him. And it would be, I don't know. I think that he's a talent that maybe just hasn't had that right fit. And I don't know if we've seen the full potential or we've seen all that we can get. And Mark, you look like you've got something that you wanted to add to that.
No, I don't really have a lot to add other than the fact that you're right. He's out of contract at the end of this year. And I just think from his perspective, he's probably not going to be, even if there was other offers on the table, and that's what makes Formula One so unique, is that unlike major North American professional sports, you can sign a contract while you're under an existing contract. We saw that with Fernando Alonso and McLaren back in 06-07 when he was still driving, still winning a championship with Renault, for crying out loud. But I think he needs to survey the landscape this year, because for all we know, AlphaTauri may be one of the most competitive cars on the grid. And if that's the case, why would he not want to stay there and compete with a team that he clearly is closely linked to? And obviously, I think, Vincenzo, you made a really great point. Like, he was subjected to the worst of what Red Bull can do to a driver when he was probably not quite ready for that seat, or may have been ready for the seat, but wasn't nurtured or given the opportunity and was yanked out of it so quickly and so abrasively. And then he went on to ultimately win a race with AlphaTauri, which is just mind-blowing. But he may just be in the best seat available, to be totally honest. Like, does Alfa Romeo offer an upgrade? Haas, Williams? I don't know. No. And then there's only 2 seats at Mercedes, and that's assuming that they're going to continue to be super, super competitive. And we don't necessarily know that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Aston Martin, I forgot about Aston Martin too. I guess, Vettel's only going to be around so long too.
Yeah, and then I guess it depends too what happens with Lance. I mean, at some point we've had this discussion before. It's like, how long does he carry the favor?
There is no Lance slander on this show. We've talked about that.
No, I wasn't going to go there. Anyways, we were going to go answer more of these questions, Mark. But before we do that, you wanted to give our good friend Andy Amendola a shout out.
Yeah, thank you for that. So absolutely. So for those of you that have been listening to the show the last couple of weeks, we've been really excited about a project that Andy Amendola has been working on through the Red Racer book series. He is publishing in both English and Spanish a children's book about Formula One. It's basically the A's to Z's of the Grand Prix weekend. It's very, very cool. I think early on the perception was that, hey, this is a book that's designed and driven towards, no pun intended, kind of that 2, 3, 4-year-old. But having looked at this, I can promise you this is a great book, and it's a great pickup for children of all ages. It's beautifully illustrated. The Kickstarter is alive now at Race. I'm just double checking my terrible writing here, but redracerkickstart.com, redracerkickstart.com. I think he's about 50% of the way to make this a reality. If you do sign up, he's hoping to get the book shipped out in April, and he is shipping globally. And again, we're only promoting because Andy's done a phenomenal job. It's a community-driven project. He's not signed up with a big book chain. He's not signed up with Amazon. He's not being funded. He's doing this himself. And I can promise you, if you've seen his work, that graphical illustrations, the content is phenomenal. So even if you don't have kids, if you have friends that do, or you have any inkling that you may have children on the way, pick this up, because it's a really, really great addition to your home library. And it's also a really great gift to kids of your sister or your brother or your friends. It's a really, really cool project. And I just want to make sure we showed him some love and gave him a quick shout out here. So once again, redracerkickstart.com.
Awesome. redracerkickstarter.com.
Quick starter. Thank you.
Quick start. Kickstarter. redracerkickstarter.com.
redracerkickstarter.com.
.com. Yep.
Thanks, buddy.
So if it's almost 1:30 in the morning in Florida, and Vincenzo's still mentally sharp, you've got no.
I got it,
Mr. Hamilton.
I got it. I've got
Sorry,
it.
Andy.
I just want to make sure Andy got his due. That's all.
Exactly right. Okay, let's go to the questions now. First one's from Troy Sneller. Question 1: ground effects used to be around, then disappeared, or now back to improve racing. but why did they go away in the first place?
We addressed this one last week, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can summarize this. Please.
Yeah, I mean, just basically in general, I mean, they were around till the early 1980s, and they were banned after Gilles Villeneuve was killed at Zolder in 1982 in practice for the Belgian Grand Prix, and that's, you know, there was a lot going on, but that was the big reason for it. And then question number 2, with Alpine releasing 2 liveries, what are your thoughts on teams going to 2 liveries, similar to how most sports have home and away jerseys? Maybe each team has a light and a dark livery. I kind of like this. I mean, the one thing I loved last year was how McLaren had that throwback livery at Monaco, and the drivers had like they had those special like edition helmets and stuff like that. I loved it. You know, I would love to see it. Excuse me, I'm getting so worked up about this. I'm choking on my own words. But I mean, the thing is, they did such a great job with it, but I think that they're kind of a little bit rigid in the rules with how many times they can do these things. But I would love to see more of it. I mean, obviously it wouldn't work for, say, Ferrari, for example.
No,
but I mean,
red.
No, I mean, exactly right. But I mean, even for Mercedes, it would, because I mean, they got the silver, but I mean that all black look that they went with for the last couple of years, that worked pretty good. The Alpine with this sort of the new pink thing would work. I mean, Aston Martin probably wouldn't. I mean, the British Racing Green is another classic. It's like the Scarlet Red on the Ferrari. It's like, why would you try and do anything with it? But I mean, the McLaren is love. I love this as much as I love the modern take with the papaya and everything like that. Just those retro, those throwback things going back to like their foundational years in the early 70s. I mean, that's just beauty. It's just gorgeous. I love it.
It was one of our listeners last year that had recommended that Monaco should be reserved for a retro livery weekend, that every year at Monaco, a team brings a retro livery, just like McLaren did last year. And Vincenzo, I'm eager to hear your thoughts on the livery piece, because this is your passion project, livery sponsorship.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I just want to go back to that ground effects piece. Daly nailed it. And just to kind of add on to that a little bit, ground effects are banned for safety reasons. They were unfortunately far too effective at creating downforce. But the problem was in that momentary instance where downforce would be lost. So for instance, in a high speed corner, if these cars were forced into contact and they lost that suction, if they lost that seal with the ground that was being created by the tunnels, they would simply spin off the track at incredibly high speeds. And there was kind of a two-phase approach to banning this. The first was that they eliminated the side skirts, which prevented the cars from sealing that air in, so it was slightly less effective at creating downforce, but ultimately it was still too much downforce. It was too high risk. And we've talked in the past about the fact that the FIA really since 94 especially has dramatically reworked every track on the calendar to make them much safer. If you go back to 1981, 1982, the tracks were a horror show. Go back and look at some of these races. Like, it's unimaginable that Formula One race cars were allowed out at full speed. But Vincenzo, my friend, back to the liveries. I won't add anything on livery. I want to hear what you've got to say.
I think this is another opportunity for sponsors to have a little bit of say on the design of the car through the colors and through the livery itself. I don't believe livery design goes against the cost cap. Correct me if I'm wrong there. So you could see sponsor dollars go towards something like that. We know that BWT is a pink, like they are very, very into their pink. So how do you make them happy? You create a second livery that's like, boom. I actually kind of like the all pink one. I'm not going to lie. I do like it.
I prefer it.
Yep.
I do like it, but it does bring up the, like what, you said, Daly, where you can see a home and away, or maybe you can see more opportunities for different retro looks. If we start seeing more of this become kind of normal, I think the rules on it will change. I would hope, because it's kind of it's a fun aspect of the sport. Also, think about it. Fans love it. The merchandise you can sell if you're F1, or if you're a team. Think about the merchandise you can sell. It's a whole new set of merchandise. Look at what Alfa Romeo did with their camo they turned that. There was a whole, they had the camo merch, they had the camo apparel that they were selling, and people were going nuts for it. And then they dropped this incredible livery, and then people go nuts for that, and they're going to buy that. So like from that perspective, from a commerce perspective, I think it's a no-brainer. The amount of fans that were eating up the Gulf livery last year was like, I'm not even a McLaren fan, and I was like, this is awesome. I want Gulf livery gear. So from a commerce perspective, I think it's so smart to allow the teams to do anything. I mean, if they want to do a livery for every, I know this is kind of far-fetched, but like if you want to do a special livery for every country you go to, why not? Right? Like and again, I know that there's regulations that are in place so that they can't just change willy-nilly like that, but that's going to have to change. That's going to change at some point. It has to, because the opportunities are just it's just low-hanging fruit. It's low-hanging fruit. And the dollars are getting bigger, like we talked about earlier. Where are those dollars going to go? Drivers, fine. Other opportunities. And I think that's an opportunity for teams to just, crush it. And Alpine did a great job with the pink, the all pink. I think that, it looks sharp. That's going to stand out on track. It's going to stand out when you're watching a race. BWT is going to get so much out of that from the all pink. And that's what, like, other, the same thing, other sponsors can take advantage of, other teams can take advantage of, is providing that, that's, hey, sponsor, we can run a livery just for you, for a weekend or whatever it might be. So like, I think we'll start to see more of those opportunities as F1 progresses, as Liberty kind of takes a firmer grip, as Generation DTS gets sucked in deeper and deeper into the sport. I think those are the opportunities that present themselves especially with liveries.
We only need to go back to the mid 1990s, right? In the United States and Canada, where if you look at the big four major professional sports, every team had two jerseys. They had their road jersey and they had their home jersey. And then all of a sudden they introduced this concept of an alternate jersey. Yeah. Why did they do that? It was because it created more merchandising opportunities.
Buy more stuff.
Yeah, dude, like you look at the NBA now, like how many jerseys do teams have? 4, 5? And they're like soccer teams now. They refresh them every year. And I buy it all because I am a consumer. And it's the exact same for Formula One, right? Like I love that point about Alfa Romeo. Like what if they did like, hey guys, we're going to do a limited edition drop of camo merch. People will gobble that up. And to your point, you make such an interesting kind of observation too. Like, what if you tie that unique drop into a sponsor? So, hey, you're not a primary sponsor, you're not the title sponsor, but hey, for this one race in your home country, because we see this with NASCAR, right? Like the NASCAR liveries and sponsorships change every week depending on where they're racing. So, hey, you're an American-based company. We're racing in the US. We're going to give you the livery this month. Like, there's so many things we can do. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. The content that can be created around it is vast. I mean, look at what Red Bull does when they go to a country. They create all this content around them doing cool stuff there. They're driving the cars around. They're shooting all this crazy video, and they make like little mini movies when they go places. I mean, those opportunities for sponsors are a completely additional aspect to sponsorship versus just Grand Prix weekend. So like as teams, and they're doing a good job already, but as they start or continue using social media, any sort of digital media, and seeing the opportunities there, like that's where these other liveries, I think you're going to see a lot of stuff happen with esports and all the e-teams like that. It's going to go like even that level, like all the teams have their own now, so like they can change liveries just for that. Again, I think the opportunities are absolutely endless, and we'll see a lot of fun stuff, which is going to make the consumer happy, which is going to make the new fan. I mean, the purists probably will hate it, but the new fans will love it, and they'll keep coming back for more, because that's how you mentioned soccer, Mark. In Europe, I mean, they've got like Venezia, the soccer team in Italy. They've got some of the most beautiful kits I've ever seen. They are like fashion drops.
I know the ones you're talking about.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. They sold out instantly. But then when throughout the year, teams are always dropping oh, here's another alternate we're going to do because we're going to wear it for whatever, one game. They sell out instantly. I think the livery, you tie in the livery with the merch and limited drops. That's how this whole thing starts to make a lot more sense and makes teams money, right? Like they actually can make money. Imagine a team like Williams, we just said, was, where financial issues, or even McLaren. Well, why are they doing better now, McLaren? Well, they're taking advantage of a lot of things that are at their disposal. Zach Brown deserves a lot of credit for that, but a lot of these teams can take advantage of these opportunities and make real dollars.
Let's just put it this way before I throw it to one more break here, before we start to turn down the lights and call it a night for another week. But this is just a statement, and I don't think either of you or anybody listening to this podcast is going to disagree, but Formula One in general really needs to step up its merch game. And they need to step it up big time compared to where everybody else is at. Anyways, time for a quick break. We'll do a couple more questions and we'll hit on a couple more news stories. And we'll do that in just a moment. So don't go away. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the show. Mark Daly, Mark Hamilton, and Vincenzo Landino here talking all about the latest Formula One news. Well, we're not talking about the latest news right now. We're doing questions. Next one is from Brian McDowell, and Brian's questions is, can you guys discuss some of your favorite F1 Twitter accounts? I'm looking beyond teams and drivers and more insiders. Bracket Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, for example, satire accounts and journalists/pundits with comedic fodder. Well, obviously comedic fodder you're going to get, well, maybe not here, but you get something here. I'll let you guys figure out what it is you get from this podcast. Anyways, Mark, I think you got something here.
Prepared so through this one, I think it's a fantastic question. And unfortunately, the reality is there is no Schefter, there is no Adrian Wojnarowski in the Formula One world. And unfortunately, a big part of that simply because so much of the media is consolidated within the broadcast network that owns the broadcast rights to Formula One. So there aren't a lot of really great F1 insiders. But that said, I did put together a couple of folks that I highly, highly recommend you follow. From a technical side of the sport, Shane Bear's fantastic, Craig Scarborough is fantastic, and Sam Collins is fantastic. I highly recommend you follow all of them. Andrew Benson, I think some people can take him. Some people don't really love him. He's a BBC reporter. He's probably the closest thing to an insider that we would get. He tends to break stories that a lot of people wouldn't because he doesn't spend a lot of time in the paddock, in the hospitality trailers that like a lot of the credentialed media do, but he's probably worth a follow as well. I highly recommend friend of the show, Vincenzo Landino, who's joining us tonight. He does some really great stuff from a marketing, branding, kind of business side of the sport. And then if you are curious as to the voices from Sky Sports, there's a couple there. Rosanna Tennant's really good. Nico Rosberg is actually a fantastic follow. He provides some really insightful stuff. Not breaking news, not like backroom dealings, contract status stuff, but he provides some really good insights into the actual racing. Natalie Pinkman's great. Jenny Gao is great. But I think for me, those would probably be the big ones that I would recommend you follow. But like I said, there isn't really a Schefter, Wojnarowski equivalent in the world of Formula One just because the way the media is consolidated. Vincenzo, am I missing anyone, or is there somebody out there that you would recommend somebody follow if they're trying to put together their Twitter F1 list?
Couple folks that I like a lot to add to your list. I like Jess McFadden. She's over at motorsport.net. I think she's great. She's funny, and she's on anywhere you can find her. So Twitter, but Twitter specifically. Joe Seward is really great. He's probably as close to an insider as I would.
Nice.
I would think, or close to like a Schefter as I could think of. I would immediately go and sign up for his free newsletter, his notebook, because he always drops insider knowledge. He's in the paddock. He's at the trackside all the time. His tweets are okay, but it's pretty much tweeting about what he's writing anyway. So like if you follow that, that's fantastic. And then of course your list is there. So like we'll stick to that. It's funny because F1 Twitter or people in F1 Twitter are like everyone's trying to like vie for this space. But there, like you said, Mark, there's just not enough access essentially. And the ones that have the access aren't very free flowing with what they have.
Yeah.
But there are some, it is getting there. It is getting, I think it's getting better. There is one more, and she's Mandy Curry. She's Mandy CTV, I think, on Twitter, and she
Mandy's
writes
great.
for Mandy's fantastic. I like her. She's just, she's kind of like, I think she just got newly FIA accredited last year, so I'm expecting a lot more kind of insider stuff from her, like at least track side from her. But yeah, really good. But I would say Mandy, Jess, and Joe for sure.
Cool. I don't have anything to add to those ones at all. Cool. Okay. Let's final question from Toby Louisa Ernst. I've got tickets to attend the Canadian Grand Prix, first in-person GP and first time in Montreal. Any tips and or tricks you can pass my way for GP attendance in general? And this one in particular, I haven't been to Montreal to watch the race, but just in general, I mean, soak up as much of it as you can. If you can get access to the pits, like when they have the open day there, do that. By all means, if you're able to do a walk around, do that. Take in most of the support races if you can. I mean, most of the time when I go to races, I end up going to circuits at venues where there's plenty to watch. And I mean, sometimes we get distracted away from the track, but I mean, Montreal is well known for being, a wonderful place to go and visit. Lots of history, great nightlife, great restaurants, and things like that. So, you are definitely not going to be, bored on your visit there. I mean, by all means, look up as much as you can of things to do in the city itself, away from the track, non-Formula One related, because you won't be disappointed. And I mean, we could probably spend an entire show just talking about all the things you could do in Montreal.
I'm going to tell a quick story about Montreal 2017. I was in Montreal during the GP, and do not buy merch from the guy or whoever it is, the store selling in Old Port, Montreal. I paid $450, 500 Canadian dollars for an Aston Martin rain jacket because I was getting poured on, and I was there for work, and we were on the streets doing some production work. So I didn't come prepared like an idiot. And I run into this store because I'm like, oh, cool. It's a motorsports Formula One store. And I saw a bunch of jackets. There was like Ferrari jackets and all this stuff. So I was going to buy the Ferrari jacket, and the guy was like, he wanted over $1,000 for it. I said,
oh my God.
No way. I was like, what's the cheapest one you got? And he points me to the Aston Martin jacket. It was an Aston Martin racing jacket. And I said, yeah, sure. I'll take that. I'm like, okay, it's cheaper. If you're telling me the Ferrari's $1,000, I'm like, this one is not that. So whatever, $450. Do not. And it's funny because I told the story on my TikTok, and somebody from Montreal responded, and she said, was this the store in Old Port? And I was like, yup. And she goes, I made the same mistake, and I got charged like triple for a Renault hat. And she's like, I bought it anyway. But so don't buy that. And if you go, or when you go, try to get into Da Emma. It's an Italian restaurant. It was 2017 when I was there, but the woman, the proprietor, Emma, she's right off the boat Italian, incredible woman. She opens and closes the store, hand makes all her own pasta. Incredible experience. You got to go there if you get to Montreal.
Me too.
I'm getting hungry just listening to that.
The only thing I would add to all of that, and that was way better insight from the two of you than I was expecting. I'm gonna relish Vincenzo's stories moving forward. But the only other thing too is, and this is feedback I've heard from a lot of people in Montreal, the track gets absolutely crushingly busy. The gates open at 7 a.m. And the recommendation, especially if you have general admission tickets, is to be there at 5:30 a.m. Bring comfortable shoes and bring earplugs. Even if you don't use them, it's nice to have them. And if you're taking children, definitely take earplugs for the kids.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Oh, just one final thing on the questions before we just hit on a couple news stories before we wrap it up, guys. So I know, Mark, you were joking with us just about how much value that you add to the Twitter sphere. And I think you tweeted something about your wife's macadamia nut cookies. But at Spooky Jarl wants to know, do you care to share the recipe? Were they that good? I'm guessing that they were that damn good.
So it was
you
a
had to
test.
tweet about it.
I can tweet something really insightful about F1 and I get 3 likes. I can post something about baking cookies and I get 50 likes. So true story, my wife was baking white chocolate macadamia nut cookies. I couldn't wait for them to come out of the oven, so I grabbed a spoon and I was eating them out of the oven. Now, full disclosure, she didn't make the cookies. If you go to Costco, and this is a Costco hack, if you go to Costco and you go into the bakery department, you can buy boxes of all of their frozen baked goods. So you don't have to buy them pre-baked. You can buy them in a box frozen. So we buy this box. It's like 40 Canadian dollars. So $5-10 American, whatever it is.
So like $5 American. Yeah,
yeah, $5 American. It has about 400 of the frozen cookies. So we just take like 10 out at a time, bake them. Nice. But I just wasn't patient. So hot tip, and again, we're not funded or sponsored by Costco, although that would be a great partnership to have, Vincenzo, if you want to work on that.
Let's go Costco.
Costco.
I love Costco.
All right, cool.
All right, I'm going to go buy those this weekend then. White chocolate macadamia nut.
Talking about like the little hole in the wall, like fantastic Italian restaurant to like white chocolate macadamia nut cookies. We got to turn this thing around and talk about Formula One. Okay, a couple last stories. First one, the race organizer in Saudi Arabia, Jeddah, has outlined the changes at Jeddah. I mean, you go and read the statement. It's turns 2, 3, 14, 21. Cool. Turn 27, simple. Turns 14, 16, 22, and 24. So basically the entire track. So we will find out. And I think that blew,
which we kind of expected though, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally we did. Yeah. But I'm just surprised when I look down like in the statement to all the different changes that they made. I was expecting a few changes here and there. I mean, the changes that they're making for this race, which is coming up just in like 3.5 weeks at the end of this month. I mean, they were. It's just amazing. So I'm glad that
it's good that they're responding to driver feedback, right? Like all of this was driven by drivers saying there's too many blind corners. So it's nice that they're addressing the safety concerns of the drivers, even if the race isn't going to be there long term and it's going to move closer to Riyadh and Qadiyah anyways. It's nice that they're still investing in this track.
Yeah. Now, moving along to Michael Andretti, and this is a story that just won't go away. I mean, he obviously tried to buy Sauber / Alfa Romeo last summer. That didn't go ahead. He's been talking about starting up his own team starting in 2024. And Michael was saying that he's been really surprised by the amount of, what he's calling like negativity that I guess, he's been receiving from do you want to call it the F1 establishment? Anyways, Will Buxton at Will Buxton Official, the Formula One journalist, Will had to say, quote, speaking to a lot of folks in the IndyCar paddock this weekend, the Andretti F1 project is serious, very serious. They could pay the entry fee as chump change and in a non-budget capped year have funding to make the top 3 wins. No wonder the establishment are worried, end quote. Now, the other thing that is interesting too, Michael was saying apparently he's approached Gene Haas 4, 5, 6 times or something like that, about buying his team. Gene apparently is not going to sell. So, Michael seems like he's bound and determined to get this thing done one way or another. And it sounds like, if he can't buy into an existing team, be it Alpha, be it Haas, he's going to do it himself. And the establishment doesn't like it, guys. Anything to add to it?
I think the establishment doesn't like it because you have it's a passionate person rather than a Doralton or a VW, right? Yeah. It's not some big organization. This is a family of passionate drivers. I think that's, I don't want to say cause for concern, but that's, I think Toto Wolff made a comment where he was like, every team that comes in needs to add value. And they're a great name, but are they going to add value to the sport? To me, that's Toto saying, damn, if Andretti's coming to the sport, that completely turned, that kind of takes maybe the shine off of us a little bit. I don't know. Maybe that's what he's worried about, but
maybe, right?
I mean, it could. It could. I don't know. Does it? But I think there's passion there. I heard on there's an NBC during the IndyCar broadcast. They had made a comment about, or they had talked to Michael, and they want to do the whole bit. They want to go F1, F2, F3. I mean, they want like a proper Andretti, formula cars, and they're ready to do it. So we need it. I think we need a proper American team anyway. Mm-hmm. So it'd be foolish. It'd be foolish for the teams not to want to bring them in. But yeah, I think anything, when you get negativity, you're doing something right. You're poking the right, you're going after kind of the right area. So he'll, I hope, get in and shake things up a little bit for the big guys.
I think that just to sort of add on to what Will Buxton was saying, that no wonder the establishment is worried when you have somebody is committed, somebody who has the funding, and obviously, like Vincenzo, you say, has the passion to do it. Yep. That with this sort of unprecedented interest and desire to get involved in Formula One, Michael might just be the first of many people that want to come, and maybe to quote unquote, the establishment doesn't like it because they're going to feel threatened. I mean, Toto kind of threw a little bit of water on it because Michael said, well, we got 200 mil up front, we can throw another 100 million on top of it. And Toto's kind of like, yeah, but you really need $1 billion if you want to come and be serious about it and stuff like that. And kind of tried to downplay what it was, but who knows?
Which is interesting. Yeah. He threw out that number, which is interesting that Toto threw out the $1 billion number. I know Mark Hamilton, we've gone back and forth with valuation of teams. So that's an interesting number that Toto threw out there. But I don't know, $1 billion seems like a lot. You obviously need to have a lot of funds, but $1 billion seems like an interesting number.
It kind of like when he threw that number out, it kind of like almost reminded me of some of like the discussions that you hear about like NFL teams. It's like, if you want to get an NFL team in your city, you're going to need $1 billion up front just to build a stadium and all the facilities and all that stuff. And I thought when Toto said that, kind of as a rebuttal to the amounts that Michael said that they have up front that they can like throw down onto the pile right now. I thought that was a very specific amount, dollar figure to throw out there. So it was just kind of an interesting reaction.
I won't rant as much as I usually do on this topic, but there was a story that broke this week because Bill Simmons came on his podcast and said, hey, the NBA is close to expanding to Seattle and to Las Vegas. And the stories popped up all over the press this week, but the speculation is that those two teams would cost an estimated $3.5 to $4 billion. And I guess the economics of the NBA are very different than Formula One. I can't believe we won't live in a world where the valuation of a Formula One team can be $1 billion, especially if teams like Red Bull can pull in $100 million a year from a single sponsor. Like that team is raking in $100 million in cash before they put a car on the track. And that excludes Constructors Championship prize money. Like I think there's a world, and Toto as well. I think he sees that there's some personal element to this as well, right? You got to remember he owns a third of that Mercedes team, right? If that team generates revenue, he's earning a third of whatever the operating income is at the end of the season. And if an 11th team dilutes the value of the prize money, he's a net. He experiences that at a personal level. So I just think that F1 needs to fix the Haas situation before they allow another team on the grid. Fix that Haas situation. You know what? Change out the ownership. Make sure that they invest in it, whatever it's going to take. But that team is a detractor to the sport in its current state. And before I would allow anyone else on the grid, I'd force the hand of that team, to be totally honest. And ideally, in my world, I think in the perfect world, that Andretti buys that team and he invests in it. They've already got a U.S. base. I think that's the right thing to do for the sport. Obviously, they can't force Gene Haas to sell. This isn't a Donald Sterling NBA situation with with the NBA in 2014. But I think that's what they got to do first, is fix that Haas situation. Then you can start looking at an 11th and 12th team.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, guys, I think that's a great place to leave it for another week. Thank you, everybody, for listening this week. Vincenzo, awesome to have you on board tonight.
Thanks for having me
again very, very soon, which I know we're going to. Vincenzo, before you go, remind everybody where they can find you and what you got going on.
At Vincenzo Landino on Twitter is the best spot to find me, and you'll see everywhere else and every other thing I'm involved with. But yeah, let's keep it simple. At Vincenzo Landino.
And we are at Scuderia F1 Pod, and also email at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com. And that's it. That's a wrap. On behalf of myself, Mr. Hamilton, and Mr. Vincenzo Landino, thanks for listening. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys again very, very soon. Bye for now.